Calendar, continuing with House bills vetoed by the governor. Next up is House Bill 2000, an act to amend the Code of Virginia relating to sanctuary policies. The governor's veto is printed in the calendar, available online and before the body.
The gentleman from Franklin, Mr. Poindexter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that the House override the governor's veto, and I'd like to speak to that motion.
The gentleman has the floor.
For the body, a brief reminder of what this bill's about. I think it's the shortest bill in session this year. No locality shall adopt any ordinance, procedure, or policy that restricts the enforcement of federal immigration laws. That might be okay for some of us to agree that immigration is a problem in the United States and the Commonwealth. And I would hope, though, too, that we can agree that disliking a bill or thinking a bill is not a good bill, not a good law. That's irrelevant. We operate under the rule of law in this country. We're expected to follow it, and we have procedures to take care of it if it's something we don't like or we don't want to do. We have elections. We have legislation. We have courts to mitigate the differences in them. So we need to go and work and change if we don't like them. What this bill is about is to ensure that Virginia jurisdictions don't actively flout the law. Don't actively flout the law. Why in the world would we need this in Virginia, the great old Commonwealth? Same reason we need it in probably a lot of other states. This year there are over 25 states that have similar legislation or identical legislation. Why? Because there are criminal elements within the illegal immigration population that do very, very bad things. And if they are provided a sanctuary, no, let's don't call it a sanctuary, let's call it a hideout. That's what it is. If they're provided a hideout, then they have a place to hide out and hurt the people in that sanctuary and that hideout as well as those who are outside. We've seen many examples of this. Obviously, Kate Steinle started the ball out in San Francisco, but then we had Frederick, Maryland, we had Texas, we had Kentucky, we had New York City. 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had a horrible rape in a school in our sister state of Maryland. 15-year-old in high school in the bathroom. And yes, now in Virginia. Earlier we had Prince William, Virginia Beach, Loudoun. And less than 2 weeks ago, we had one of the most hideous, grotesque murders that I've read about in my neighboring county. I live in Franklin County, but this was in Bedford. And the link pointed directly. We like to use the term nexus. The nexus is Rockville, Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland. So now we've had this exporting problem out into the hinterland of Virginia. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that some here today are going to argue that there's no definition of a sanctuary jurisdiction, that illegal immigrants start more businesses, that to create less crime. We're a nation of immigrants. Everybody should come to the United States unrestricted. That this would hurt police efforts and public safety, that I'm unwelcoming and I'm mean-spirited. That's not the point. That's not germane in our language here. That's not the issue. The issue is public safety. The issue is public safety. Mr. Speaker, the issue is that for the local governments actively trying to thwart federal law enforcement is simply not acceptable in the Commonwealth. We have laws. They should be obeyed. We expect our citizens to obey them, and we darn sure should expect a higher standard of conduct from our towns and our cities and counties. In concluding my remarks, Mr. Speaker, Who else is going to stand up for the innocent victims, whether they're inside that hideout or they're outside? They come in from outstate or they come in from somewhere else in the state. It's up to us, folks. If our local governments don't do it, the buck stops here. I would ask the body to override the governor's amendment.
The gentlewoman from Fairfax, Ms. Boysko.
Mr. Speaker, I speak to the veto. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate the gentleman from Franklin County and his concern for safety. I want it too. I think everybody in this room does. But I would like to say, as someone who represents a majority-minority district with a huge, at least 42% of my constituents were born in other countries or have family members who were born in other countries, I would like to say that HB 2000 is actually unnecessary and it will create an unwelcome division for us. Because the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution already prohibits state and local governments from overriding federal immigration laws. It's not necessary. It's already on the books, and we're obligated to follow the federal law. What HB 2000 would do, if enacted, would be to make many of our law-abiding constituents feel more unwelcomed than they already do. And if you look at the current political climate right now, I can promise you, because I have spent an enormous amount of time in my community and the immigrant communities, they are terrified. They feel unwelcome. They feel like they're women who aren't even going to the grocery store because they don't want to be pointed out and be told, go back to where you're from, even if they're American citizens. There are children who are not going for after-school help in the community because they're afraid of being pointed out. There are kids who are being told, who are American citizens, go back home. We don't want your kind here. We don't need to add to this rhetoric. You may not be aware that municipalities already have discretion as whether or not they enter into a 287G agreement with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. But, costs are really high for the municipalities, and as I said before, they sometimes have a very chilling effect on our law-abiding legal residents. I also want to share with you that statistics show that immigrants are 45% less likely to commit a crime than American citizens. We're not going to blanket them and say that just because they might have been born in another country or have a different heritage, that they're inherently bad and dangerous. There are tens of thousands of law-abiding, legal people in our communities who do good things in our economy, and we don't need to continue to scare them. Most localities in the Commonwealth have decided not to enter the 287G agreement because it takes significant resources needed. And as I speak to policemen in our communities at the county level, at the local level, they say they want to have community policing strategies where people feel safe to come and talk to the police so that they are building relationships. I attend the Adams Center, which is our Muslim community, all the time, and there are always police and sheriffs there because they want to build relationships. They don't want to put a wall up. Our police and first responders have worked very hard to cultivate a trusting relationship with all of the members of our community. We want our members of our community to say when they've seen a crime, and they do, and likewise to feel safe when they might have been the victim. When we turn our police into immigration officials, it has a harming effect. So I just want to say again,
Mr. Speaker.
We already have the law
Mr. Speaker,
on
the
our
gentleman
side.
to yield for a question.
I'd prefer to finish my statement, Mr. Speaker, if that'd be okay. I'm just about done.
He declines to yield.
So as I was just finishing up, I understand that we want a safe society, but we do not need HB 2000 because the Supremacy Clause of the United States already prohibits states and local governments from overriding federal immigration law. Thank you very much. I ask you to override, to support the veto.
Ms. Speaker, would the gentlelady yield for a question?
Gentlewoman yield.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Speaker, I'd ask the lady, does she believe that localities should be able to pass policies that restrict the enforcement of federal immigration law?
I already said I don't.
Ms. Speaker, would the gentlelady yield for a further question?
Will the gentlewoman yield?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Speaker, I'd ask the gentlelady, did she read the version of the bill that came out of the House before it was amended in the Senate? And if so, how do her comments differ from the last version as opposed to this version?
Mr. Speaker, I will admit to you that I don't remember exactly what it said. I don't want to misstate anything.
Ms. Speaker, speaking of the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the body, I've not spoken on this immigration bill, and it's actually not an issue that I've made a big deal about. But the thing that is so frustrating is when you hear an argument that has absolutely nothing to do with the actual bill before us. Everything that the delegate just said actually are really relevant arguments to the bill that passed the House the first time. Because when we passed it the first time, it said not only could localities not restrict enforcement of federal immigration law, but they couldn't do anything that wasn't to the full extent of federal immigration law, which would have required, arguably, law enforcement to enter into these agreements with localities and with the federal government. That, frankly, for once this session, the Senate did something smart. They actually took that language out. And so all the complaints about we don't want our law enforcement locally to be immigration officials, all of that was taken out. The only thing this bill says is localities can't violate federal law. If you think localities should be able to violate law, then do what she asked you to do. Go with the governor. And if you do that, what you're saying is localities should be able to pass ordinances that restrict the enforcement of federal law. If the only thing you want to say is, hey, localities, let the feds do their jobs and don't get in the way, then you should vote to override the veto.
The gentleman from Alexandria, Mr. Levine.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the veto.
Gentleman has the floor.
If the only thing this bill does is say that localities can't override federal law, then it is unnecessary and duplicative. The United States Constitution Supremacy Clause already says that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the House override the governor's veto? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 65, noes 34.
Ayes 65, noes 34. The House fails to override the governor's veto.